It was my 32nd birthday, and my husband had planned everything. That's what he told me anyway. Don't worry about a single thing, Ava. I've got it all handled. He even said it with that smile, the one that used to make me feel like the luckiest woman alive. The one I'd fallen for 9 years ago at a mutual friend's cottage up near Muskoka, when he spilled his beer on my jacket and spent the rest of the weekend apologizing by bringing me snacks and making me laugh until my stomach hurt. We'd been together ever since, married for 6 of those years, living in our semi-detached in Oakville, Ontario with the navy blue front door I'd repainted twice because I could never quite get the shade right. A good life by every measure I knew how to use. So when he said he'd planned my birthday, I believed him. Why wouldn't I? He'd booked a weekend at a resort in Collingwood, just the two of us. No work, no phones buzzing with notifications, no obligations. He even arranged for our dog to stay with his sister. I packed a bag on the Thursday night, folded my favorite sweater on top, and felt something I hadn't felt in a while. Genuinely, uncomplicated happy. We drove up Friday afternoon. The leaves were just starting to turn, that first week of October when the highway north of the city gets unbearably beautiful, and you remember why people make that drive every fall? He had a playlist going. He held my hand on the center console. I remember thinking, maybe things really are okay. Maybe I'd been imagining the distance between us. The dinners, where he looked at his phone more than at me. The way he'd started going to bed after I was already asleep. Maybe I'd been catastrophizing, which my sister always says I'm prone to. I thought this weekend is proof. He planned this. He loves you. We checked in, dropped our bags, opened the curtains to a view of Georgian Bay going silver in the late afternoon light. He opened a bottle of wine he'd brought from home, a Niagara Pinot Noir he knew I liked, and poured 2 glasses. I went to freshen up. When I came back, he handed me my glass. "Happy birthday," he said, and kissed my forehead. I took the glass and drifted to the window. I wanted to look at the water. I wanted to just stand there for a minute with my wine and my view and let myself be 32 without thinking too hard about what that meant. He excused himself to take a call. "Work," he said. "Just 5 minutes," and stepped into the bathroom with the door half closed. That's when I heard him. Not his words at first, just his voice. Lower than usual, the kind of low that means the call is not about work. I didn't mean to listen. I was looking at the bay, but the room wasn't big and the bathroom door was only half closed, and some part of me, the part that had been noticing the late nights and the locked phone and the way he flinched whenever I stood too close while he was texting, that part of me went very, very still. "She doesn't know anything," he said. I stopped breathing. "I told you we have time. The policy doesn't pay out until 2 years from the signature date, and we're at 18 months. 2 more months and we're clear." The wine glass was cold in my hand. I didn't move. "She's fine. She's happy. She thinks this is a romantic weekend." A pause. Then, quietly, "She trusts me completely. That's the whole point." I don't know how long I stood there. Long enough for him to laugh softly at something the other person said. Long enough for the silver on the bay to turn gray. Long enough to understand, fully, with a clarity that felt almost physical, like cold water, exactly what I was hearing. He wasn't talking about a business deal. He wasn't talking about a surprise. He was talking about me, about waiting, about a policy. He was talking about collecting on my life. I set my wine glass down on the windowsill without making a sound. My hands were shaking, but I held them still through sheer force of something I didn't have a name for yet. Not courage, exactly. More like the animal instinct that kicks in when you realize the danger is very close and very real and you cannot afford to panic. He came out of the bathroom 2 minutes later, smiling, pocketing his phone. "Sorry about that. Ready for dinner?" "Almost," I said, as smiled back. "Give me a second." I picked up my wine glass and went to the bathroom. I poured it down the drain, rinsed the glass, ran the tap for a moment so he could hear water running. Then I looked at myself in the mirror and made a decision. I was not going to confront him, not here, not in a resort in Collingwood, 2 hours from anyone who could help me, with no car keys in my pocket because he'd driven. I was not going to cry or scream or throw the wine bottle I'd been thinking about throwing. I was going to go to dinner. I was going to smile. I was going to act like nothing had shifted on its axis, even though everything had. Even though I could feel the whole architecture of my life cracking quietly beneath me. I was going to keep my head. Dinner was a 40-minute meal I will never fully remember. I ordered the salmon. He had the steak. He told me about a podcast he'd been listening to on the drive up. I said, and really, and that's interesting in what I calculated were appropriate places, and the whole time I was doing math in my head. 18 months. 2 more months. Policy doesn't pay out until 2 years. I'd taken out a life insurance policy. I remembered it now. We'd done it together 3 years ago when we bought the house. His idea. It's just practical, Ava. Everyone does it when they get a mortgage. A $800,000 policy. Standard, he'd said. Reasonable, he'd said. The person on the phone was a woman. I'd caught the pitch as a voice before he'd lowered his own. I didn't know who she was yet. I had some guesses that I pushed aside for later. When we got back to the room, I said I was tired. Birthday exhaustion, I told him, laughing a little, and went to bed early. He stayed up watching something on his laptop. I lay in the dark with my eyes open and made a list in my head of every piece of information I needed and exactly how I was going to get it. I am, professionally speaking, not someone you'd expect to be calm in a crisis. I work in human resources for a logistics company in Mississauga. I manage conflict technically, but the kind that involves performance reviews and workplace accommodation requests? Not this. Not whatever this was. And yet, something about knowing, really knowing, with certainty, made me steadier than any of the months of half-suspicions had. The not knowing had been slowly hollowing me out. The knowing was terrible, but it was solid. I could stand on it. When I got home Sunday afternoon, I told him I had a headache and went upstairs. He stayed downstairs to watch football. I sat on the edge of our bed and called my older sister. She lives in Hamilton, 40 minutes east. She's a paralegal. She is, of the two of us, the one our mother always said would survive anything. When I told her what I'd heard, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Don't touch anything. Don't confront him. Don't change your routine. And come to my house tomorrow morning. Tell him you're getting a haircut." My sister knew a lawyer. Of course she did. That's the thing about having a paralegal for a sister. She collects lawyers the way other people collect referrals for good plumbers. This one was a woman named Carol, and my sister had called her before I even arrived in Hamilton the next morning. Carol had a small practice out of a Victorian house on James Street North, and she sat across from me with a yellow legal pad and listened to everything I said without interrupting once. When I finished, she said, "You mentioned a phone call. You didn't record it." "No." "What else do you have access to?" That was the beginning. I need you to understand something about the next 6 weeks, because I think it matters. I didn't become some action hero. I didn't hack his phone or hire a private investigator or do any of the dramatic things you might be imagining. I was an exhausted 32-year-old woman going to work every day and coming home to a man who had apparently decided I was worth more dead than alive. And all I had was my sister, my lawyer, and my own extremely good memory. What I had access to was our joint account, the one we used for household expenses. And I'd started noticing, about 8 months ago, transfers I didn't recognize. Small enough not to flag, large enough to add up. 200 here, 350 there. I'd mentioned it once casually, and he'd said it was a client dinner he'd forgotten to tell me about. I'd let it go. I'd let so many things go. Carol told me to start keeping records, not to take anything, not to move any money. Just to photograph bank statements, document what I found, keep a log with dates and descriptions. I did exactly that. I was meticulous about it in a way that surprised even me. I'd create the notes on my lunch break, in my car in the parking garage at work. and then email them to Carol from a new account I'd created on a library computer in Port Credit? 3 weeks in, Carol called me. I spoke with an RCMP contact, she said. Off the record, preliminary. They want to know if you're willing to speak with someone. I was willing. What I learned over the next few days, through careful conversations I won't fully recount here, because some of it is still part of an ongoing matter, is this. My husband had been having a relationship with a woman he'd met at a conference in Calgary the previous year. She worked in finance. She was, the investigators later established, not unaware of his plan. The insurance policy had been taken out jointly. I'd signed the paperwork. I remembered signing it. I hadn't read every line because I'd trusted him to explain it correctly, which is a thing I will carry with me for the rest of my life. There was also a second policy, one I hadn't signed. One that, Carol explained grimly, may have involved a signature that was not mine. I had no idea any of it existed. The 2-month window he'd mentioned on the phone, that was real. The original policy's contestability period was 2 years. Fraud, unexpected circumstances, suspicious death. An insurer can deny a claim within that window more easily. After 2 years, the bar gets higher. He was, in the most calculated possible way, waiting me out. When I understood that fully, sitting in Carol's office on a Tuesday afternoon in November with rain hitting the windows, I think I felt something that was almost beyond anger. It was so deliberate. 6 years of marriage, 9 years together, and he had looked at me and done arithmetic. Decided on a number. Decided on a method. Decided on a window. I kept going to work. I kept making dinner. I kept sleeping in the same bed, which was the hardest part. Lying there in the dark, listening to him breathe, knowing what I knew, and not being able to say a single word. My sister called me every evening around 8, and I'd take my phone to the backyard and we'd talk in low voices until I felt steady enough to go back inside. There was a moment, about a week before things came to a head, when he looked at me across the kitchen and said, "You seem different lately." And I looked back at him and said, "Just tired. Work's been a lot." And he nodded and went back to his phone, satisfied. That was the moment I stopped being afraid of him. Not because I thought I was safe, I didn't, but because I saw very clearly that he had completely underestimated me. He was so certain in his assessment of me as someone who trusted him completely that he couldn't see what was happening right in front of him. His confidence in my obliviousness was his blind spot, and I had walked straight through it. The investigators moved in late November. I was at my sister's house in Hamilton. Carol had advised me to be somewhere else, and my husband thought I was there for a girls' weekend. The call came from an unknown number, and I picked up on the first ring, and the woman on the other end told me it was done. He was arrested at our house in Oakville. The woman he'd been involved with was picked up the same morning at her apartment in downtown Toronto. There were text messages. There are always text messages, apparently, which is something every would-be criminal seems to learn too late. And financial records, and enough of a paper trail that Carol, when I spoke with her later that day, sounded almost satisfied. He's been charged with fraud and conspiracy. There are additional charges I've been asked not to detail publicly yet. The insurance company has been notified. Both policies are flagged. I did not go back to the house in Oakville. My sister came with me once to collect my things, and then I found a small apartment in Hamilton, not far from her. It has white walls and big windows and a radiator that clanks in the night in a way I've come to find almost comforting. My dog is here with me. I repainted one wall in the living room a navy blue, not because I'm trying to recreate anything, but because I've always loved that color, and now I can put it wherever I want. People ask me sometimes why I didn't confront him the moment I got back from the bathroom in that resort room. Why I poured the wine down the drain and went to dinner and smiled and said, and really, like everything was fine. I understand why it looks strange from the outside. I understand the impulse to want the dramatic scene, the confrontation, the moment where you throw the glass and say your piece. But here's the thing about confronting someone who is planning to hurt you. It tells them you know. And once they know you know, they change the plan. And you have nothing. By staying quiet, I gave the people who actually had the power to stop him the time they needed to build something real, something that would hold in a court of law, something that couldn't be explained away or dismissed. I know it's not the satisfying story everyone wants. I know people wanted me to pour the wine on his head in the restaurant, but I wasn't trying to win a scene. I was trying to come out of this alive and with enough left to start over. I'm 32 years old. I have a navy blue wall and a clanking radiator and a dog who sleeps at the foot of my bed. My sister lives 12 minutes away. Every morning, I make my coffee and stand at my window and watch Hamilton wake up. And I think about how strange it is, how completely disorienting, strange, that this is what survival looks like. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just a woman standing in her kitchen, watching the light change, deeply grateful for how ordinary it all is. I still think about that moment at the window sometimes, the bay going silver, the wine glass cold in my hand, the way my whole body just stopped. People assume that when something that terrible happens, you fall apart. And maybe some people do. I don't think I'm braver than anyone else. I think what happened is that the shock of knowing, finally knowing with certainty, burned away everything that wasn't absolutely essential. There was no room left for panic. There was only, what do I do next? That's the thing about trust and what happens when someone weaponizes it against you. My husband understood correctly that I trusted him. What he didn't understand, what I don't think he was capable of understanding, is that trust isn't the same as blindness. I had noticed things, months of small things I talked myself out of because I wanted to believe in what we built together. That instinct to stay, to give benefit of the doubt, to not be that person who assumes the worst, it's not weakness, but at some point it can become a choice you're making unconsciously, and it's worth asking yourself why. I don't think my husband was always the person he became at the end. I think greed and whatever that woman in Toronto represented to him changed the calculation in his head in ways I'll never fully understand. That's on him. Every single piece of what he chose is on him. But I also think about the version of me from 2 years ago, the one who signed insurance paperwork without reading every line because she was too busy trusting the person explaining it. I think about her with a lot of gentleness now, and also with the clear-eyed recognition that she was overdue for a harder look at the facts in front of her. What saved me wasn't luck. It was the decision, made in about 45 seconds in a resort bathroom in Collingwood, to be smarter than my fear. To not let the emotion of the moment drive me into a confrontation that would have destroyed any chance of justice. My sister used to say, when we were kids, that the most underrated thing a person can have is the ability to sit with discomfort without acting on it. To hold something terrible in your hands and not throw it at the nearest wall? I didn't fully understand what she meant until that night. There's a version of this story where I walked out of that bathroom and screamed everything I knew across the dinner table. And maybe that would have felt good for about 30 seconds, but he would have lawyered up. The other woman would have disappeared. The text messages would have been deleted. And I would have been alone in a resort in Collingwood with no car, no plan, and a husband who now knew exactly how much I knew. Staying quiet was the hardest thing I have ever done. It was also the right thing. And I think it's worth saying that those two things can be the same thing at the same time. I have a small apartment now, navy blue wall, a radiator that clinks, my dog at the foot of the bed. It's not the life I planned at 32, but it's mine. Fully, clearly, without anyone else's arithmetic built into it. And that, honestly, is something I couldn't have said before any of this happened. If there's anything I want the people listening to take from this, it's not some tidy lesson about red flags or toxic relationships. It's simpler than that. It's that your instincts are usually trying to tell you something. That intelligence isn't just about what you know. It's about what you're willing to see. And that resilience isn't dramatic. It's quiet. It's pouring the wine down the drain and going to dinner with a smile and making a list in your head and calling your sister in the morning. It's surviving the ordinary Tuesday after the worst night of your life and then doing it again the next day,